Reciprocals and multiplicative inverse is the topic of the lesson 11. And when we say reciprocal and multiplicative inverse, really we're talking about the same thing. It's just one is the same name or that means the same as the other. So reciprocal and multiplicative inverse, as you can see the slide says, they mean the same thing. Let's go through some examples, and then at the very end I want to come back and explain why they mean the same thing and how you can remember that multiplicative inverse is the same as reciprocal and vice versa. Now, I want you to write down some examples as I go through. So the first one that I have is 2/3. Now, if I ask you for the reciprocal or multiplicative inverse of 2/3, it's 3/2. So in other words, as most of you know, for the reciprocal or multiplicative inverse, you simply flip the top and bottom number. You switch the numerator and the denominator. So 2/3 is the reciprocal of 3/2. And I can go right down the line here and say vice versa. 3/2 is the reciprocal of 2/3. Or in other words, the reciprocal of 3/2 is 2/3. So I could really write the word reciprocal all the way down. And I'm not going to do that, but I'll just put maybe just R, just to abbreviate that. So 3/2 is the reciprocal of 2/3. Another example, how about if you have a negative value? Now, something here to keep in mind is that when I write a -4/11, really the proper way to write a negative fraction is with a negative right at the bar level. Now, if you don't do that, so for example, say you write it with a 4 and like this, or say you drop the negative down and you write it with the bottom number, the denominator. You know what? All these mean the same thing, but again, the proper way is where the negative is written right next to the bar, although all of them mean negative. So this is a negative value, this is a negative value, this is a negative value. The whole thing is a negative. So when we take the reciprocal of a -4/11, you switch them, but the sign still stays the same. So really, I'm going to rewrite these a little bit. Have that negative sign right by the bar. So all you do, again, is just flip the top and bottom number, but it stays negative. So the reciprocal of a negative value is still negative. So at the last example that I have on this slide is that a -11/4. Now notice again that I have the negative on top, probably not the best way to write it. But if we ask for the reciprocal of a -11/4, it's a -4/11. So again, to take the reciprocal or multiplicative inverse, you flip the top and bottom number. Let's go through some other examples. Now in this one, so 1/4, if I flip that around or take the reciprocal of it, it's 4/1. Now I could write this as just 4 also. So the reciprocal of 1/4 is 4. Now, how about the other way around? Let's see, 4. How would I take the reciprocal of a whole number? Well, I think of 4 as 4/1. Now I flip it, so the reciprocal of 4/1 is 1/4. Reciprocal of, again, not a whole number, but an integer. Well, a -5, think of that as a -5/1. The reciprocal would be a -1/5. -1/5, the reciprocal of that is a -5/1. Flip the top and bottom number. Or, that's just a -5. Now, what happens if you have a mixed number? I cannot say that the reciprocal of 2 1/3 is just simply 2 3/1, something like that, where I just flip the fraction part of it. That's not how that works. So when you have a mixed number, what you need to do is change it to an improper fraction. So take the bottom times the big is 6, add the top is 7/3. Now take the reciprocal of that, and the reciprocal of 2 1/3 is actually 3/7. Likewise, change the mixed number to an improper. So 8 times 4 is 32. Add 7, 39 over the bottom. and then take the reciprocal of 39/8, flip them around. So 8/39 is the reciprocal of 4 and 7/8. Now, before we forget, let's go back to some of these examples here. What happens, what's the relationship between a number and its reciprocal? What's the relationship between a number and its reciprocal? And yeah, you might say, hey, you just flipped them around, and that's right. But what I'm getting at is the relationship between a number and its reciprocal is that when you multiply them together, a number and its reciprocal, you always get 1. So for example, down here, a -5/1 times a -1/5. Let's see, negative times negative is positive. +1. Let's go back to some of these. How about 3/2 and 2/3? When you multiply a number and its reciprocal, you always get 1. So notice I'm emphasizing when you multiply a number and its reciprocal. So you can kind of see why reciprocal is also termed as multiplicative. Multiplicative meaning multiply, inverse. Inverse meaning flip them. So multiplicative inverse means when you take a number and flip them, or multiply it by the number when you flipped them, you always get 1. So reciprocal, multiplicative inverse. Now there is one number that does not have a multiplicative inverse. I want you to think about that for a moment. And that number is 0. Because we can write 0 as 0/1. But when we flip it, when we take the multiplicative inverse or the reciprocal, why can't I do that? Well, if you think back to, what, a lesson ago, you cannot divide by 0. This is impossible, right? This is undefined. So the only number that does not have a reciprocal is 0. All right, so a short section, but hopefully cleared up a little detail on it, and that's reciprocals, or in other words, multiplicative inverses.